For reporters on the line, please feel free to submit your questions to our panelists anytime during the event via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll take your questions at the end of the program. And welcome and thank you to all of those joining us on Facebook Live. We at the ELM Action Fund build political power to meet the scale and urgency of our environmental challenges. And we are proud to be the Massachusetts affiliate for LCV. In our decades of advocacy, we have seen time and time again that cities are on the front lines of environmental issues, and often the birthplaces of innovation and progress. As Americans grapple with the impacts of climate change, mayors across the country are rising to meet the challenge. We are at an inflection point where federal funding could and should empower cities to lead. We're honored to have some of these key leaders here with us today, each of whom is taking the whole of government approach to fighting climate change in their city. Mayor Justin Bibb of Cleveland has centered his first term on a safer and healthier city by funding lead-safe certification of homes, prioritizing climate justice, and increasing the frequency and reach of public transit. Mayor Kate Gallego of Phoenix has a long history of working on infrastructure, including expansion of light rail, and in a city facing extreme heat, interconnecting cooling corridors with public transit, ensuring residents of her city, particularly those living in EJ communities, have safe access to sustainable transportation. I also just learned she's a proud LCV or former LCV intern. And here in Boston, we're lucky to have Mayor Michelle Wu. She has a detailed Green New Deal and just recovery plan for the city and has quickly started implementing this strategy throughout her administration, including divesting city funds from fossil fuels and expanding free public transit in overburdened and underserved communities. But before we turn to the panel, it is my pleasure to introduce U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg has been a climate champion since his days as mayor of South Bend, where he implemented the city's Smart Streets program. Today, the secretary is working to address our largest source of climate pollution, the transportation sector. Secretary, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Great. Well, thanks so much, first of all, to the League of Conservations for the invitation to join you and for convening this discussion and for everything that you do. I'll be very brief in my remarks because I'm really eager for the conversation that we're going to have. But let me share a bit about why we come to this conversation with such a sense of urgency. In the U.S. economy, transportation is the single biggest contributor to climate change. It's also responsible for more than half of nitrogen oxides that can cause respiratory diseases. So to me, that amounts to a challenge for us to aspire to be the biggest part of the solution. And right now, we're also seeing in new ways and in very stark ways, reminders of the importance of moving this country toward energy independence as a matter of national security, economic security, day-to-day affordability for Americans, and of course, the climate. And so I'm really pleased to be with three fellow mayors who are doing very important work in this regard. Mayor Gallego in Phoenix, Mayor Bibb in Cleveland, and Mayor Wu in Boston. The job of mayor has only become more important, more demanding, and more difficult since I left it. And I really admire what each of you is bringing to this. And, we recognize in the context of this federal agenda and policy that we're pursuing that ultimately it is going to fall to local and state leaders to provide so much of the leadership that's actually going to decide whether the 2020s are the decade in which we rose to the climate challenge and beat it and set our infrastructure on the course that was going to keep America competitive and healthy for the rest of our lifetimes or not. So here we have this opportunity, thanks to the president's infrastructure law, with once-in-a-generation resources to make transportation more affordable, make it more equitable, make it more safe, and very, very importantly, reduce its emissions and pollutions. And I'm thinking about it in three buckets for the purpose of these conversations. First of all, for driving. Driving is going to be a very important part of transportation any way you cut it for a very long time in America. So we're working to improve the gas mileage of cars, which lowers cost to families and reduces emissions. In fact, there's a big announcement on that coming soon. And we're working to make electric vehicles more accessible and affordable to everyone, building a charging network across the country, and continuing to press for policies that would lower the upfront cost, which I'll come back to in a second. Second, in addition to improving gas mileage and lowering the barrier for EVs, we need to give people more options to get to where they need to go. You shouldn't have to drag 2 tons of metal along with you on every single trip that you take in your daily routine or work. And the infrastructure law, for this reason, makes the biggest investment in public transit in our history, creating unprecedented new programs for transit as well as active transportation, making walking and biking often a safe option for recreation and for commuting. And when you consider that the majority of American trips are actually less than 3 miles, there's a ton of opportunity in terms of what mayors can do with federal support. And then that brings me to the third bucket, which is we need to bring the things that people need closer to people. We can also decide how these trips unfold. And that's a matter of planning policy. It's a matter of urban policy, housing policy, but also one that touches transportation through things like transit-oriented development that I know the mayors here are such leaders on. So look, the opportunity is transformational with the bipartisan infrastructure law, but to fully seize the opportunity to create climate jobs, to prevent the worst consequences of climate change, to protect Americans from the kinds of shocks that happen when foreign wars break out or oil markets go through their ups and downs. We are going to need more action from Congress. The president was clear that we need Congress to deliver, among other things, legislation to lower the cost of an electric vehicle. So these new EV pickup trucks that we're seeing in the Super Bowl ads that start at $40,000, those could be in the high 20s if we got these policies through and be accessible to that many more Americans. Just take one example. And I'm optimistic that we can find a package that does that. And in the meantime, we're not wasting a moment to deliver the opportunities that are in our hands thanks to these resources. So thanks. I'll stop there, knowing how much ground we have to cover in this conversation, but just so pleased to be with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, and I'm glad you'll be able to participate in the panel. I do have a few questions to kick us off, but I do want this to be as free-flowing of a conversation as possible. And as we've just heard, the cities really are uniquely positioned to start making a lot of these strides. So Mayor Bibb, I'll start with you. You are ensuring climate justice is in every job description to bring sustainability and climate justice into all of Cleveland's activities. What can other cities learn from your approach?
Well, Casey, we wanted to do that because it's important for us as a city to ensure that we mitigate the impact that climate change has on communities of color. And one of my mantras as mayor is that every decision we make in the city of Cleveland must be grounded in the lived experiences of people. And we know that in communities of color, air quality is a challenge. Access to affordable, equitable transit is a challenge. Food deserts is a challenge. And so I've charged every member of my cabinet to make sure that every decision we make is grounded in equity, is grounded in climate justice to ensure we can eradicate these structural barriers that have plagued cities like Cleveland for far too long.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Mayor Gallego, in Phoenix, we know residents are facing much hotter temperatures. Your administration has really prioritized mitigating the impacts of extreme heat. Tell us about your efforts to address this challenge.
Wonderful. So we have made responding to heat a whole of government approach here. We have the first in the nation permanent office in city government called the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation that says addressing heat is something that is in everyone's priority list. I haven't quite put it in everyone's job description yet, so I'm already learning from Mayor Bibb and what he's doing. Our office is able to look at really innovative solutions. How do we use the best building materials and construction materials? We have a cool pavement program where we put a light colored coating on our city streets, which have been black asphalt. We found in partnership with Arizona State University that the coating reduces street temperature 10 to 12 degrees at the surface. So that's a difference that our residents can feel. And just by using more advanced science, we can make life more comfortable. Secretary Buttigieg came the week the Infrastructure and Jobs Act passed and talked to us about some of the investments we're making at the airport thanks to that federal partnership. But he talked to our aviation director about some of the advanced materials that might help with carbon sequestration as we build out the airport. And so now we have an office that can go and make sure we are on the cutting edge in that area. And frankly, it was very exciting for us because we're not used to DOT and FAA really challenging us to be forward thinking on technology in that way. And we loved it. So we're glad we have some of the tools to try to keep up with the bold vision that the administration is setting for us. In addition to using cutting edge technology, we're also trying to use some of the most established techniques to address heat. We have a major strategy to plant more trees, particularly in low income communities. Phoenix was the first city to participate in American Forest Tree Equity Pledge, which says that as we plant our trees, we'll really have an eye to equity. In Phoenix, like so many other urban communities, you see many more trees and a more lush tree cover in wealthier neighborhoods, and we're making a concerted effort to change that. We're hoping to use federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan to try to plant trees, but then pay local residents to maintain them. So we're creating local economic development as we help homeowners have up to 4 trees, which can really cool the home temperatures, reduce energy bills. And that's been also a priority of ours. As we reduce heat, we want to make sure our residents see that. We've put in shaded tree canopies at our public housing with solar on top. And then our residents are getting a $15 bill credit so that they benefit from both the shade and the solar. So again, we are trying to have an eye towards impacting those who have been most harmed by policies in the past as we develop our climate plans for the future.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear you really touch on the city to federal partnership. I think that's a central theme of this conversation today. And Mayor Wu, I wanted to touch briefly on your Citywide Green New Deal plan, which runs nearly 50 pages and spans a wide array of issues, including transportation justice and green jobs, and notably ends with a call to address Boston's intersectional crises of climate change, racial justice, and income inequality. We've seen you already put federal funds to work expanding free fare public transit for 3 bus lines. But what more might you need from the federal government, or what type of partnership are you looking for to achieve your ambitious goals?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. It's an honor to be on this incredible panel with colleagues who I look up to and admire. And thank you to LCV for all your work. The Secretary has already been incredibly helpful with this particular pilot program in conversations that we had in a chance to see him and several other cabinet secretaries as part of a mayor's visit to the White House. And so I am just over the moon with Boston's now running pilot. I think city government has the real potential in this moment to be the testing grounds and the innovators where we can move fast. We can put those dollars to work right away. And in some ways, in a city like Boston, the biggest barrier is our belief that we can't do more. And so having the ability to deploy flexible funds that are directed to address harms and impacts from the pandemic, we've been able to shift what's possible. Right? For years, people had said in Boston, there's no way that you could implement fare free transit. How would it work? How would you fund it? What would the point be? And we're seeing now that when you can see it, feel it, sit on it, experience all the benefits of it, we not only prove that it makes such a fundamental difference in our residents' lives, but the impacts are intersectional and multiplicative as well, right? Students getting to school now, being able to make different decisions about the jobs they can take, organizations that can run programming across these corridors, businesses that can open up because they can depend on a longer term pilot program where now for 2 full years, we're guaranteed that these 3 key bus routes won't have fares and residents can come on and off. And we're already seeing the operational efficiencies from bus service that is running faster because people don't have to stand in line at every stop, open their bags, dig through for their passes, uncrinkle the dollar bills. And so we're seeing the benefits of that, plus some of the road design changes that we're making with dedicated bus lanes along the way. So what the federal government could do is to continue being a strong partner. So grateful for the flexibility that these federal funds have allowed us. We are allocating all of ours in line with a Boston Green New Deal. We could use this continued push to allow for federal funding to support future looking projects and transformational initiatives. I know I've had some conversations with folks in this room already about what it means to be able to apply funding to take down highway infrastructure that had been dividing communities and really think about knitting our neighborhoods back together, planning ahead for our resiliency as a coastal city and the climate impacts. I'm going to look to Mayor Gallego's heat office and see if we can implement some of that here. And really, just ensuring that this moment isn't one about putting Band-Aids on the deep needs that we have, but truly transformational investments and having the partners across city, state, and federal government to support that type of momentum.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor Wu. As an avid user of the T and the public transit in Boston, it's certainly music to my ears. And I know right now, particularly the prices at the pump and gas prices are really something that's affecting the national conversation. So Secretary Buttigieg, I'll turn to you. As the top transportation official, I'm sure this is on the top of your mind. We've heard you touch a bit on EVs and other plans that the administration has in mind. But what are you doing to alleviate the pain at the pump right now and in the future?
So, as you know, we've taken a number of steps in the near term just to try to help stabilize some of these prices, things like releases from the strategic reserve that the president authorized and worked with our international partners to make sure we weren't the only ones doing it. But in the long run, it's very clear that renewable energy is key to insulating the U.S. from international energy crises. And the long run is actually increasingly upon us, right? I mean, many of the tools and tactics for addressing this are already available to us. Some of them in the form of new technology, like electric vehicles. Some in the form of proven strategies, like making use of transit in order to create more options for people. And this is part of a bigger picture of how we power this country, transportation included, but only as part of it. Now, I would also add a little bit outside of my transportation lane that while there is famously a great deal of limits on the direct control that any official has over gas prices, there are a lot of steps that we can take right now on things that are directly responsive to policy to help ease the pain that Americans are feeling in family budgets by lowering the cost of insulin, prescription medication, housing, childcare, elder care, pre-K, you name it. So, in terms of relief for the American families, we know what we could be doing and we'll continue asking Congress to act. But specifically with regard to moving into the future that we need to make not so distant with regard to not just the energy mix, but the way we energize our vehicles. We know that we need to act now, and we know a lot of these tools are in our hands if we were willing to use them.
That's great. And for the last question, or one of the last questions, I really want to turn it over to everyone, but I suppose we can let Mayor Bibb kick it off. But each of you has really mentioned the inequitable distribution of climate impacts in your city or nationwide. And we know that this is a complex and intersectional problem, but can you share just one initiative that you're really proud of in your city, whether it be because of federal funding or just another action you have taken to really tackle this climate injustice? Because I've been reading examples from each of your cities, and there's certainly a lot to highlight here.
Yeah. Well, Casey, in Cleveland, within weeks of taking office here in Cleveland, we announced that we're going to use $17 million of our American Rescue Plan funding to fully eradicate the lead paint crisis in Cleveland. And we got an additional $50 million from the Cleveland Clinic through a partnership that brings our endowment to over $100 million to make sure that no home in Cleveland has lead paint. And in our city, the lead paint epidemic undermines the ability of children to learn and undermines the ability of our community to thrive from an economic development perspective. And in many cases, it is public enemy number one in our city. The other thing I would say is throughout the pandemic, what we learned is that the amenities of our neighborhoods truly matter, and it goes a long way. And so just several weeks ago, my planning department, we had a key briefing on how do we make Cleveland truly one of the first cities in North America to adopt a 15-minute city framework. So regardless if you're in a wealthy neighborhood in our city or a low-income neighborhood, Everyone deserves good quality grocery stores, good quality public transit, good quality parks, because climate change and the impacts of climate change is really about race and equity and social justice.
Great. Hope I see you come off mute, Mayor Gallego.
So Phoenix exists because we are a river community. We're built along the Salt River. The Hohokam communities, hundreds of years before, built canals to provide water to farms. And then Phoenix got its name because we rose from the ashes of that infrastructure. But it's the river is very much part of who our city is. Apparently, my founders also considered naming the city Pumpkinville because there were a lot of native pumpkins in the area, and I'm very grateful they went with Phoenix and not Pumpkinville. But the river is something we hope to really be part of our future as well. It's become an industrial zone with a lot of rock products mining projects. And my council just had a very exciting vote at our last meeting unanimously for our first RAISE project to try to build multimodal transportation infrastructure, but really focused on active bicycling, walking infrastructure along that, and try to really redevelop the river. It's an area of our city that's been subject to redlining in the past, communities of color. We have a lot of public housing in the neighborhood. And if we could really get that investment going forward, it, I think, would be a perfect example of the values that the Biden administration is trying to align with, as well as honoring the history of Phoenix, not Pumpkinville.
Pumpkinville's catchy. I would go there. I'll touch on a different dimension because I get to speak about our very exciting free bus pilot already, which is on the job side. And so very, very thrilled that we're using a chunk of our federal recovery dollars to really build out and make sustainable Boston's Green Jobs program, which is modeled after the Philadelphia Power Corps program. So shout out to one of our other cities as well. The idea is that we have tremendous infrastructure need across the city, whether it's retrofits or thinking about building green infrastructure and managing our parks and stormwater infrastructure in particular, a huge economic opportunity. And let us build the workforce that can then provide the labor as well as the entrepreneurship opportunities and pipeline to lean into our green economy moving into the future as well. So we will try to tie together all pieces of that, proposing to put another chunk of funding towards a specific small property owner residential housing stock directed retrofit program that could be linked with this job and workforce development training program, making sure that we're getting young people from our communities, formerly incarcerated community members, those looking to change job fields, bringing down unemployment in our communities, all through the lens of how we build and develop the foundation for great jobs well into the future.
Great, thank you. And Secretary Buttigieg, I know that the administration has the Justice 40 initiative, so I'm sure there's no shortage of examples from you all.
That's right. The principle of Justice 40 is that at least 40% of our clean or green investments in the context of this infrastructure law will go to overburdened and underserved communities. And what I hear in the comments that each of the mayors has made is, first of all, really compelling vision about what this looks like on the ground, and also an example of how different that might be from one community to another, something that we welcome and embrace. We're focused on the outcome and making sure that these dollars lift up communities in terms of taking away those barriers that have stood between people and where they need to go, investing in places that have not been invested before, recognizing, certainly appreciate Mayor Bibb's note about the 15-minute concept, because it's often not, distance is not often always felt in miles, it's really felt in minutes. And often something could be a mile or two across town and very hard to get to safely because of how your city is built or divided. But likewise, sometimes in a very spread out community like Phoenix, I didn't know that about it having nearly come to be Pumpkinville. One way or the other, it was always destined to be a community with a lot of a lot of expanse, but that can be made into an easy to traverse distance with the right kind of policies. And I've really admired the ambition that a place that was once considered to be one you could only thrive on in a car is now also one where the active transportation and transit visions that the mayor has pursued and just described makes such a difference. And Mayor Wu has pointed out, among other things, the importance of the job creation and economic opportunity here. Climate investments are one of the best, and infrastructure investments actually are one of the best places to break the old false choice between environmental responsibility and job creation. This is job creation through doing the right thing environmentally. And the jobs that this creates, I know they're sometimes called green collar jobs. I would point out that they're very plainly blue collar jobs in a traditional sense, even if they're working sometimes on non-traditional things. So this is part of what it means to fortify pathways into the middle class. And I have yet to visit a community in all the variation there is among our communities and states in the US where there aren't these kinds of equity considerations up close and personal, directly touching what we do around transportation, around preparing for a climate future, around resilience. And I'm just inspired by the local leadership that I see making it happen.
Well, I think I never heard the green collar jobs, and that's something that we're definitely going to be bringing to the lexicon here in Massachusetts. I'm now going to turn to a couple of our reporter questions. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa at the Washington Post. I think they're going to be unmuted so she can ask the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Hello.
Hi. Secretary Buttigieg, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about if you think the country will meet Biden's goals for the deployment of electric vehicles if Congress doesn't pass the reconciliation bill, which does include, tax credits for EVs.
Well, there are two major barriers we see to widespread EV adoption. One of them is upfront price, and that's what these proposals would do something about. And I can't help but notice that some of the same people who are critical of electric vehicles for costing too much have been resisting our calls to reduce the price through things like these tax credits. I can't say exactly what legislative form this policy will ultimately take, what the name will be of the legislative package that gets it through, but we're going to continue to press for it because this is a very important part of how we can work toward those goals. And I would add, very important to the automotive industry that has already made a number of choices based on where the market is almost inevitably going. What's not inevitable is that it happen in a way that is equitable, that is fast enough, and that is made in America. Now, having said that, the second big barrier is one that we're working on right now, and that's access to charging stations. Everywhere from long trips, where we need to make sure that we have a backbone of chargers across our highway system, to community charging. This is very different than filling up with fuel. For some, it's much easier because if you have a single family home, you can literally charge an EV with an ordinary plug in the wall. For others, it's much harder because if you're in a multifamily dwelling, there's no guarantee that you're going to have access to that kind of overnight charging. And so we need to make sure that we are supporting on all fronts the development of that EV charging network to tear down that other barrier that's often called range anxiety. Now, I'll say even today, we are fast approaching the point. And in some categories, I think we're there, where it is cheaper. If you add up your car payment, which may go a little higher, and your gas bill, which will go lower, you're already likely to come out ahead. But still, we know that affordability is a barrier for many people who would benefit from EV ownership and continue to believe in policies that would reduce that, give our automotive industries a running head start in getting to the economies of scale that will ultimately make this the cheapest option and best option for any driver, any family deciding what car to buy next.
Thank you, Secretary. And our second question will be from Christopher at Inside Climate News.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the opportunity. This question is for Secretary Buttigieg also. Mr. Buttigieg, you had sort of mentioned at the beginning of your speech how a lot of this policy will end up falling to state and local governments. With that in mind, some environmental justice advocates worry that in states that are not aligned with the Biden administration's agenda, the federal infrastructure money won't get to the most disadvantaged communities. So my question is, what are you doing to ensure the money will advance environmental justice goals in places where state leadership is opposed or maybe wants money to go elsewhere? Thank you.
First of all, of course, we're engaging closely with state leadership. I had a great session with AASHTO, the Association of State DOTs, a couple of weeks ago here in here in DC. And we're in touch with all of the state officials who are going to be making so many of these important choices. Look, by design, formula dollars are in the hands of the states. But these imperatives are also coming from the ground up, not just from Washington down. And so I also know that these states are hearing from their own communities, whether we're, no matter the party of the governor of that state, for example, communities in states red, blue, and purple are talking about the need for environmental justice, the need for making sure that transportation serves everybody, the need to do something about climate. Now, the second thing I'll point to is that based on some lessons from past experience, many of these formula programs have a safety valve. So, for example, I fully expect that every state and territory, red, blue, and otherwise, will submit a good plan for the EV charging formula program. But just in case they don't, their communities will not be punished for that. There will be an opportunity for those dollars instead to flow to the communities directly. Third, I'll point to our discretionary programs, which are a major part of what's in the infrastructure law. They've expanded considerably. Those give us a chance to engage directly with local leaders like Mayor Bibb, Mayor Wu, Mayor Gallego, their respective transit agencies and other local entities that have compelling visions for the future, so that we're creating a menu here where it's not only the traditional formula through the states, but a direct line in from even the smallest community to my building as well.
Can I just add to Secretary's point here? It's so important for us as mayors to work in concert with our state legislatures and our governors to advocate why these dollars are important and why having an equity lens around them is critical. Tomorrow, I'm going down to Columbus, our state capital here in Ohio, to join the Ohio Mayor's Alliance. And we're going to talk about what's going to be our strategy and framework to make sure we have a compelling vision to ensure that our governor has a true framework and perspective on how these dollars can support cities like Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And I think many of my mayoral colleagues across the country share that same sense of strategy and urgency around this issue.
I would add that many mayors are working to address the issue that Christopher mentioned. I have the privilege of serving as a co-chair of Climate Mayors, and we've had great conversations with the secretary and his team about the EV program and how the administration might have some metrics to make sure that charging is deployed in a way that helps all communities. Obviously, there'll be a need for some fast charging to address range anxiety, but if we do more level 2 chargers in communities and really look at where population centers and needs are, that might be a way to make sure that type of resource gets distributed with equity in mind. And so Climate Mayors has partnered with RMI and others to try to provide our suggestions of metrics that might allow these resources to be deployed in a way that puts climate justice at the forefront and also helps cities and population centers thrive. And there are several great efforts that DOT is working with us on many different areas. That's just one example.
That city to city organizing and best practice sharing has already been incredibly fruitful. And I think as we get more tangible examples and proof points from the deployment of these federal dollars in different programs at work or infrastructure investments that tie together multiple different areas and address multiple community needs at once, there's a network and space that many of us are learning from each other on. And I think cities in general just have the chance right now to really be clear about translating the urgency into the experience of people's day-to-day lives when it comes to climate. That for a long time, I think climate was often discussed as a very high level, inches of seawater and things that are far into the future. But as we've all said, just even today, it's here now. It is urgent. It's connected to every part of people's lives. And so if we can help be the conduit, not just to show what works, but also how fast we need to be moving, I think that that's where our value add and unique ability to deploy funding can make a big difference.
And I think that's a great call to action to kind of end our conversation today, that it is urgent and that we all should be doing what we can. And certainly we can look to the great leadership provided on this call today for some of those great examples. So on behalf of our partners, I want to thank you for joining us today. Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for your service in Washington. And Mayors Wu, Gallo, and Bibb, your leadership is really setting a great example nationwide. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.